Ma'am, the visitors' lounge and the family support center are back down the main concourse. Building 402, Miller said, stepping into her path. He made his voice patient, helpful, the kind one uses for a pleasantly confused elderly person who has wandered off course. It's easy to get turned around in here. The woman Lois Barton didn't move. Her gaze wasn't offended or flustered. It was analytical, sweeping over him, the checkpoint, and the controlled chaos of the pit beyond the armored glass. Her posture was erect, a subtle ingrained stillness that spoke of a discipline far older than the young Marine blocking her way. She held up a simple government-issue ID card. "I'm in the correct location, Sergeant," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried over the low hum of the servers, each word perfectly enunciated. Miller's smile became a fixed professional mask. "I'm sure you think you are, ma'am, but this is a restricted area. Access is for mission-essential personnel only." He gestured to the scanner. "If you'll just let me see your credentials, I can help you find who you're looking for. Maybe your son or daughter works here." Lois Barton said nothing. She simply inserted her card into the scanner. The machine beeped, a cheerful permissive green. The light flashed. "Barton, Lois M. Consultant. Clearance, TS/SCI/SAP. Level 5. Miller blinked. Level 5 was a ghost. He'd never seen it. His own clearance, which gave him access to the nation's most sensitive intelligence, was a Level 3. He stared at the screen, then back at the old woman in the tweed jacket. It had to be an error, a glitch in the system. "There must be a mistake," he said, his tone shifting from patronizing to suspicious. He took the card from her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. Her skin was cool and dry, her hand surprisingly steady. He examined the card under the harsh fluorescent light, tilting it back and forth, looking for signs of forgery. The lamination was perfect, the hologram of the Department of Defense eagle shimmering correctly. The photo showed a younger version of the woman before him, her hair darker, her face less lined, but the same intelligent, unblinking eyes stared out. The issue date was from the late 1990s. "This credential is over 20 years old, ma'am," he said, his voice hardening. "It's not compliant with current HSPD 12 standards. I can't accept this." "The system accepted it," Lois pointed out calmly. "The system can be wrong. Policy requires a current generation common access card for entry." He was on solid ground now, quoting regulations. He felt the familiar comfort of procedure. "I'm going to need to see another form of identification and find your on-base sponsor." A few operators at the nearby consoles had started to notice the quiet standoff. They turned in their ergonomic chairs, their faces illuminated by the glow of their screens. A low murmur rippled through the section. An old woman being denied entry wasn't unusual. An old woman with a level 5 clearance was unheard of. Lois reached into her worn leather handbag and produced a state-issued driver's license. Miller took it and began tapping her name into his console, initiating a secondary verification check. He was aware of the growing audience. He was doing his job, ensuring the security of the command. He would be meticulous. "The system is taking a while to verify your status, ma'am," he announced, a little too loudly. "There seems to be a flag on your file. We'll need to wait for my supervisor." He was lying. Her name had returned a single cryptic result. Verification level, O10. Contact command protocol, O10. A 4-star general. Miller's blood ran cold for a second, but he quickly dismissed it. It was obviously a typo. A glitch from a legacy file that hadn't been properly archived. This woman wasn't a 4-star. She was a civilian, a consultant, probably a retired clerk whose security file was a mess of outdated permissions. His supervisor, Staff Sergeant Davis, arrived, exuding an aura of caffeine and impatience. "What's the problem, Miller?" "This individual is trying to gain access with an expired credential, Staff Sergeant. The system green-lit her, but the card is ancient." File came back with a weird flag. "I think she's a former employee who never got properly processed out of the system." Davis looked Lois Barton up and down. His eyes lingered on the tweed jacket and the soft lines of her face. He saw exactly what Miller saw, a lost grandmother. "Ma'am," Davis said, his voice firm but still tinged with that same condescending patience. "Sergeant Miller is correct. For your own safety, and for the security of this facility, we can't allow you access based on this. Who are you here to see?" "I have a meeting with General Wallace," Lois said, her voice unwavering. Miller almost laughed. A meeting with the 4-star commander of the entire Joint Command? It was absurd. Davis just shook his head. "I'm sure you do," Davis said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look, we can call the front gate, get you a visitor's pass, and find your escort. But you are not entering the pit. Not today." As they spoke, Lois's hand had been resting on her handbag. Her fingers toyed with a small metallic object pinned to the lapel of her jacket. It was a tiny, unassuming pin, its silver finish worn and tarnished with age. It depicted a stylized globe crossed by a lightning bolt and a key. It was meaningless to Miller and Davis, just another piece of old jewelry. The pin's tarnished surface caught the light, and for a fleeting moment, the sterile, air-conditioned chill of the GOC vanished, replaced by the searing heat of a desert sun. She was no longer an old woman, but a 40-year-old Marine major, her uniform caked with fine sand, standing in a command tent somewhere in the Saudi Arabian desert in 1991. The air was thick with the smell of canvas and hot electronics. A grim-faced colonel was pinning the very same object to her collar. The men of Task Force Ripper were heading into a Republican Guard ambush. "Major Barton," he'd growled, his voice thick with emotion. "Your intercepts of their encrypted comms gave us the warning. You saved a battalion today. Don't ever forget that." The gleam of the silver fresh from its box was a stark contrast to the worn metal she touched now. She was brought back to the present by Staff Sergeant Davis raising his voice. "Ma'am, did you hear me? We're trying to help you." From across the room, sitting at a diagnostics console, Master Gunnery Sergeant Reynolds had been watching the exchange with growing unease. He was a lifer, a man with 30 years in the Corps, and his memory was long. He'd been a young lance corporal during Desert Storm, a radio operator who had spent his days listening to the cacophony of the battlefield. He'd heard stories, legends, whispered in communication sheds and passed down from one generation of spooks to the next, stories of an analyst so good, so intuitive, they called her the Oracle, an officer who could pull needles of truth from haystacks of digital noise. He squinted, trying to get a better look at the old woman. Her face was familiar, but time had softened the edges. Then he saw the pin on her lapel. His breath caught in his chest. It was the unit insignia for the 2nd Radio Battalion's Signals Intelligence Detachment, a specialized unit that had been deactivated 15 years ago. But it wasn't just any pin. It was the command variant, given only to the unit's commanding officer. He'd only ever seen one before, in a grainy photograph in the base's historical archives. The officer in that photo had been a sharp-jawed major named Lois Barton. Reynolds felt a wave of nausea. He watched as Miller, puffed up with self-importance, put a hand on the woman's arm. "Ma'am, you're creating a disturbance. You're going to have to come with me." "Get your hand off her," Reynolds' voice boomed across the operations floor. It was a violation of protocol for him to shout, but he didn't care. Miller and Davis turned, startled. Every head in the pit swiveled in their direction. "Stay at your post, Master Guns," Davis snapped. But Reynolds was already on his feet, his face pale. He ignored Davis and looked directly at Miller. "Sergeant," he said, his voice now a low, dangerous growl. "Take your hand off Dr. Barton, right now." The use of the title doctor hung in the air. Miller, confused but sensing the seismic shift in the room's atmosphere, slowly retracted his hand. Reynolds didn't wait for an explanation. He turned, walked briskly to a secure phone line at the edge of the room, and punched in a 4-digit extension. He shielded the receiver with his hand, his back to the drama he had just amplified. "This is Master Gunnery Sergeant Reynolds in the GOC. Sir, I apologize for calling your office directly, but we have a code red situation at the security checkpoint." "No, sir, not a breach. It's procedural. It's Dr. Barton, sir. They have her held up at the door." "Yes, sir, that Dr. Barton, Oracle." There was a pause. Reynolds stood a little straighter, listening. "Yes, sir. Understood." He hung up the phone and turned to face the room. He walked back towards the checkpoint, his eyes fixed on Lois Barton with a look of profound, almost fearful respect. He stopped a few feet away and simply stood, waiting. He didn't say a word to Miller or Davis. He didn't have to. The entire room was now watching, silent and tense, sensing that something momentous was about to happen. The silent waterfalls of data on the screen seemed to hold their breath. The phone call from Master Gunnery Sergeant Reynolds bypassed 3 layers of command and landed directly on the desk of Major Eva Rostova, General Wallace's executive aide. Rostova was a formidable officer in her own right, a combat veteran of Afghanistan with a mind like a steel trap. She was the gatekeeper, the woman who managed the 4-star's life down to the second. Nothing reached the general without her approval. "Say that again, Master Guns," she said, her voice low and calm, betraying none of the alarm bells ringing in her head. "Ma'am, it's Dr. Lois Barton. The floor sergeants have her stopped at the GOC entrance. They think she's a confused old lady." The name Barton triggered a memory from Rostova's early training at Quantico, a case study about signals intelligence during the Cold War. But it was the call sign that hit her like a physical blow. Oracle, a legend, A myth, the architect of the very analytical models they still use today. Hold your position, Master Guns. Do not let them move her. Do you understand? Crystal clear, ma'am. Rostova disconnected the call and swiveled in her chair. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, her own high-level clearance slicing through layers of digital red tape. She pulled up the file for Lois M. Barton. The screen filled instantly. It wasn't a personnel file, it was a monument, a career spanning from the Cold War to the early days of the War on Terror. First woman to graduate top of her class in advanced signals analysis. First woman to command a radio battalion. Commendations from operations that were still classified, their names blacked out with digital ink. Panama, Kuwait, Bosnia, Afghanistan. Her official retirement date was listed as 15 years prior, but her status was marked Active Consultant, Priority Omega. It was a designation Rostova had never seen before, one that apparently granted unlimited access at the direct behest of the Secretary of Defense. Her list of mentored officers read like a who's who of the intelligence community. Dozens of names, now colonels and generals, owed their careers to her. The last name on the list made Rostova's blood run cold. James T. Wallace. She didn't knock. She burst into the general's inner sanctum, a spacious office with a panoramic view of the base. General Wallace looked up from a thick briefing binder, his brow furrowed in annoyance at the interruption. "Major, this had better be important." "Sir," Rostova said, her voice tight with urgency, "we have a situation in the GOC. It's Oracle." The general's expression changed instantly. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief, followed by a flash of raw anger. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. "What did you say?" "Dr. Barton is at the GOC checkpoint, and they're giving her hell." Back on the operations floor, Sergeant Miller's professional certainty had curdled into confused resentment. The silent accusatory stare of the master gunnery sergeant was unnerving. He felt the need to re-establish his authority. He fell back on the unassailable logic of the rulebook. "Ma'am," he said, his voice strained and formal, "regardless of whatever this is, your identification is not valid for entry. It constitutes a security violation. Now, I've tried to be patient, but your refusal to cooperate is escalating this situation. You are claiming to have a meeting with the commanding general, a claim we cannot verify, while presenting fraudulent credentials. At this point, I am required to detain you for questioning by the military police." He looked at Staff Sergeant Davis for support. Davis, looking unnerved by the master gunnery sergeant's behavior, gave a hesitant nod. This was the final, irrevocable step. It was an accusation of espionage, essentially, an act of professional self-immolation, though he didn't know it yet. "This is your last chance to cooperate," Miller said, reaching for his radio. "I am calling for an escort to have you removed from this facility." It was at that exact moment that the main doors to the GOC hissed open. The sudden silence was absolute. The low hum of the servers and ventilation systems seemed to die away. Every operator, every officer, every NCO in the vast room froze, their eyes locked on the entrance. General James T. Wallace strode into the room. He was in his Service Alpha uniform, the forest green jacket perfectly tailored, his chest a solid block of brightly colored ribbons, 4 silver stars gleaming on each collar. He moved with an explosive purpose that radiated pure, unadulterated command authority. Flanked by Major Rostova and 2 colonels, he didn't look at the screens, he didn't look at the section chiefs who were scrambling to their feet. He looked at one person, and one person only. He walked directly toward the security checkpoint, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the polished concrete floor. His eyes, the color of chipped slate, were fixed on Lois Barton. He passed Sergeant Miller and Staff Sergeant Davis, as if they were pieces of furniture. He stopped 2 feet in front of Lois. For a moment he just looked at her, and his hard, weathered face softened with an expression of profound respect and genuine affection. Then, in the dead silent heart of the most advanced military operations center on the planet, the 4-star general brought his heels together with a crack that echoed through the room. He raised his right hand in a salute so sharp, so precise, it could have cut glass. It was a gesture of ultimate respect, an honor guard salute, held with unwavering stillness. "Dr. Barton," his voice, a baritone accustomed to commanding armies, was filled with a sincerity that stunned the room into complete submission. "It is an absolute honor to have you back in the pit." "Ma'am," he held the salute, his eyes locked on hers. Lois Barton, the old woman in the red tweed jacket, simply gave him a small, warm smile and a slight nod. Only then did the general drop his hand. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the frozen figures of Miller and Davis, and then across the entire silent room. The warmth in his eyes was gone. replaced by a glacial fury. For the benefit of those in this room who are too young to know their own history, the general began, his voice dangerously quiet but carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. "Allow me to introduce you to a living legend." He gestured towards Lois. "This is Dr. Lois Barton, and the only reason this command center exists in its current form is because she, and a handful of others like her, invented the very doctrines of signals intelligence we now take for granted. She wasn't just on the front lines of the Cold War, she was the front line." He took a step towards the assembled crowd. "When I was a young lieutenant in Panama, my platoon was spared from walking into a cartel ambush because then Captain Barton's team broke a supposedly unbreakable code. In Desert Storm, she pioneered the analytical techniques that allowed us to map the Iraqi Republican Guard's entire communication network. We called her the Oracle for a reason. Her insights saved hundreds, if not thousands, of lives." He turned his head slowly, his eyes finding Sergeant Miller, who looked as if he was about to faint. "She wrote the book on ethical intelligence gathering. She trained the first generation of cyber warfare specialists. She served in combat zones when the official policy said women weren't allowed, and she did it better than any man next to her. She has forgotten more about the security of this nation than any of you will ever learn. That expired ID card you hold in your hand, Sergeant, has more operational history associated with it than the combined service records of everyone in this room." The weight of his words settled over the pit. The younger operators, men and women who had grown up in a fully integrated military, stared at Lois with a new dawning comprehension. They were not looking at a lost old woman, they were standing in the presence of a founder, a pioneer who had kicked down the doors that allowed them to walk through. General Wallace now stood directly in front of Miller and Davis. "Your job is to enforce standards and ensure security," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "But you let your eyes deceive you. You saw gray hair and a tweed jacket, and you made an assumption. You failed to verify. You failed to listen. You failed to see the truth right in front of your face. Your bias, Sergeant, is a greater threat to the security of this facility than any forged ID card." Lois Barton stepped forward slightly. "General," she said softly. Wallace immediately turned to her, his demeanor softening again. "Lois, I am so sorry." "It's not your apology to give, James," she said. She looked at the two stricken-faced sergeants. Her expression was not one of triumph or anger, but of a teacher addressing a difficult but promising student. "Sergeants, the general is correct that you made an error in judgment, but let this be a lesson. Don't soften standards, ever. The standards are what keep us all safe, but you must apply them fairly, to everyone, regardless of their age, their gender, or the clothes they wear." She paused, her eyes meeting Miller's. "Experience doesn't expire with youth, Sergeant. Gray hair doesn't mean a person is soft. More often than not, it means they've survived the things that broke younger people." As she spoke of survival, another memory, sharp and cold, surfaced. She wasn't in a desert this time, but a windowless concrete bunker deep under the Berlin Wall in the mid-1980s. The air was stale, smelling of cigarettes and fear. For 3 days straight, she had been listening to faint, distorted signals. A high-level East German officer who wanted to defect. Everyone in Washington was eager to believe him. But something in the cadence of the transmissions, a subtle, repeated error in the encryption protocol, felt wrong. It felt rehearsed. It was her lone voice, a junior officer against a dozen colonels, that convinced the station chief to stand down. A week later, they learned the defection was a trap, a meticulously planned ruse to capture an entire team of CIA case officers. Her intuition, her experience, had saved them all. She looked back at the young man before her, who now seemed to be seeing her for the first time. The lesson was complete. The fallout from the incident in the GOC was swift and decisive. General Wallace, true to his word, ordered a command-wide review of all entry and verification procedures. An addendum was added, specifically addressing how to handle legacy credentials held by long-serving consultants and emeritus personnel, explicitly warning against age or appearance-based bias. More than that, he mandated a new block of instruction for all security personnel, a course on the history of the command, focusing on the contributions of its diverse and often unheralded pioneers. The course was unofficially nicknamed the Oracle Brief. Sergeant Miller and Staff Sergeant Davis were not formally punished in a way that would end their careers. General Wallace believed that would be too easy an escape. Instead, they were formally counseled, a black mark on their records that would follow them for years. And in a stroke of what Miller considered cruel but profound irony, he was assigned as the lead instructor for the NCOs in his section for the new Oracle Brief. He was forced to stand before his peers and recount the story of his own failure, using it as the primary case study for why they should never judge a book by its cover. He had to learn her history, her accomplishments, and teach them to others, owning his mistake in the most public way possible. Weeks later, Lois Barton was working in the quiet, climate-controlled sanctuary of the base's historical archives, cross-referencing old mission reports for a new analytical project. The archives were a place of deep silence, broken only by the soft rustle of paper. She looked up from a declassified document to see Sergeant Miller standing hesitantly in the doorway. He was in his utility uniform, looking younger and far less certain of himself than he had in the GOC. He cleared his throat. "Dr. Barton? Ma'am?" Lois closed the file in front of her. "Sergeant Miller, please come in." He walked over to her table, clutching a small notebook. He stood stiffly, as if at attention. "Ma'am, I know a lot of people have apologized to you on my behalf, but I needed to apologize to you myself, face to face. What I did was inexcusable. There's no other word for it. I was arrogant, and I was wrong, and I am truly sorry." His apology was earnest, stripped of all the bravado he had previously shown. It was the apology of a young man who had been humbled to his core. Lois gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit down, Sergeant." He hesitated, then sat, perching on the edge of the seat. "You did your job," Lois said, her voice even. "You saw something that didn't fit the pattern, and you challenged it. That is what you are trained to do. Your instinct was correct. Your conclusion was wrong." "My conclusion was based on what you looked like," he admitted, his face flushing with shame. "Yes, it was," she agreed without malice. "Let me tell you something I learned a long time ago in a bunker in Berlin. The most dangerous threats are the ones that look harmless, the ones that perfectly mimic what you expect to see. And the greatest assets are often the ones you dismiss at first glance. Your job isn't just to see, it's to see correctly. To look past the surface and analyze the data. My red jacket, my gray hair, that was just data. You misinterpreted it." She leaned forward slightly. "You have the makings of a fine NCO, Sergeant. You are diligent and you believe in the rules. That is a foundation. Now you have to build the rest of the house. A house with bigger windows so you can see the whole landscape." Miller stared at her, the simple metaphor landing with surprising force. He finally nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He spent another hour with her in that quiet archive, not as a security guard and a consultant, but as a student and a teacher. She shared a few carefully chosen stories, small lessons wrapped in the cloak of history, and for the first time he began to understand the immense, unseen world that existed just beneath the surface of the regulations he had clung to so tightly. He left that day not just with a lesson in humility, but with the first seed of genuine wisdom. If you were moved by this story of quiet valor and the enduring strength of our nation's veterans, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to She Chose Valor for more stories honoring the women who have served in silence and strength.